Colorectal cancer is the third most common cancer in the world. There were 1.9 million people diagnosed with colorectal cancer in 2020 alone. And currently you need a colonoscopy, which is going to diagnose that colorectal cancer, which is incredibly invasive. Now, the biotech world and the innovative people in the biotech world are involved with creating screening in the form of stool tests. And my guest today is part of that exact movement. So Guido Baechler is the CEO of Mainz Biotech, or Mainz Biotech, if I'm to say that correctly. He has got a really interesting background, started as an electrical engineer, did AI way back in the mid-90s, spent time at Roche and a few other biotech companies, and is now building out a screening test for colorectal cancers in the form of a stool test. So on this episode with Guido, we talk about his background building companies in the biotech space and spending time at Roche and putting together a career that allowed him to become an incredible CEO. We talk about his leadership style and how he likes to lead organizations, putting listening and understanding first. And obviously we talk about the technology that they're involved with and the potential benefit of this technology reaching the masses. In order to get there, it needs a strong business model. We talk about that. We talk about how you actually get a test like this to be reimbursed. And that's different in every geography, in every country. And we talk about how this can be used in different cancers too, particularly pancreatic cancer, which is something that they are involved with currently, doing some partnerships in the space to figure out the biomarkers there. It's a really good episode, this one. Touches home. I've got pancreatic cancer story in my family, as does Guido actually. And so this screening is something that's incredibly important to both of us, but also to the world. There's so many examples of these types of cancers hitting families and breaking them apart and affecting so many people. So this is a movement, a technology, a philosophy that I really buy into. I think prevention is incredibly important. We actually talk about in this episode actually how prevention, whilst being important, it's difficult to know who pays. And when you're figuring out the health economic model, when you're figuring out the value to a big system before a big system can buy it and implement screening everywhere, how do you actually prove that it is going to add that value? We talk about all this stuff, and yeah, it's a really good one. Hope you enjoy it. So Guido, welcome to the Healthtech Podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks, James, for having me. I'm doing great.
Excellent. We've been talking about biotech quite a lot recently. We've had a few biotech founders on. We've had Ori Biotech on in the past. We've had Oka Bio and Jack on recently. It seems like biotech and health tech, the line is becoming quite blurred, actually. And I know today that we're going to be talking about colorectal cancer. We're going to talk about the microbiome. We're going to be talking about diagnostic tests. And I don't know, I'm starting to really get more and more involved in biotech. I think there are a lot of frontiers, not least with the microbiome. So incredibly excited to have you on, Guido. Whereabouts are you speaking to us from today?
I'm from Lucerne, central Switzerland, the most beautiful city in the world. That's very close to where I grew up, actually.
Excellent. So Guido, it's a pleasure to have you on. You've got a really interesting background across pharma, across biotech, leading Mainz now, and obviously doing some interesting things in colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, and all this diagnostic stuff. I'm really keen to hear your story. So for the benefit of me and our listeners, tell us the long version.
Sure, I could go on for a while, but let me focus on the long version, but on the most important milestone. So I was born in a very small town outside of Lucerne, the central city in Switzerland. Grew up in a, would say, very quiet environment with my family. I started off studying electrical engineering, so I got really involved in electronics early on. Tried to figure out what to do. Very early stage, worked with artificial intelligence in the mid 90s, which was really completely unheard of at that time. I was very lucky to get a job at Roche Diagnostics after my degree. And it was a very unique opportunity because I got to work in a technology department that span across multiple technologies, multiple diseases, and really from beginning on felt that don't tie me down to one thing. I wanted to learn many different things. Being an electrical engineer, I ended up working in a lab, doing molecular work and, working with artificial intelligence, creating, challenging problems for the company. And so it was really fascinating for me to really, as I came out of university, to really got into a very innovative, creative team that was focused on teamwork, science, and really multidisciplinary activities, right? So really not just focus on one area, but go broad, because in technologies, often, specifically when you look at biology or diagnostics, it's not just about like a chemistry. It's a chemistry, it's blood, it's mechanics, it's electronics, it's software. Everything actually comes together and ultimately has to work reliably, compliant to be able to create results. So that was really the entry for me into the diagnostic space. In an important part of my life was I went to the United States to improve my English in '91, where I met my wife. And then ultimately made me move to the United States in '96. And that was really interesting because Roche Diagnostics in early '90s acquired the PCR rights from Cedars Corporation. Cedars Corporation was in California, and they invented PCR. And I think all listeners by now know what PCR is. It's the polymerase chain reaction, which is used for all the COVID tests. I think years ago, many people were not aware that that's really the absolute best technology to identify small viruses. And you can identify small viruses, you can identify, mutations of genetic variations, etc. So I moved to the US, relocated, really immigrated there, and got the pleasure for many years to work with the inventor of that technology. So it was fascinating for me I was the first engineer to be sent to Cedars and Roche Molecular at that time to work with the biologists to help them translate what it means to get their technology automatable, how to make the technology scalable so you can actually automate it. And so now these were large machines, and now 30 years later, you look at the small handheld PCR platforms that are out there. So it's really fascinating for me to see how that technology has really evolved over those many years. So that, I think, was a very important part for me to get, learning on an absolutely breakthrough technology, again, applying all cross-functional thinking, right? Then including production, manufacturing, very complex regulatory activities. And so this was really the base for me, first in research with Roche. Again, I do have one example where with David Gelfand, and he's one of the the leading inventor of technology. Is a phenomenal individual, and I'm very structured and organized and planned. And he had, I remember, walked into his office and he had like 100 papers on top of his desk and a total chaos, right? And I was like, David, can you help me with one specific topic? He lifted the paper, found the right paper out and gave it to me. And it's like, how the hell do you remember where that paper is? And say, like, that's just how my brain works. So it was a fascinating story for me to see how people are different, right? So, but again, it's an important part of learning. When you build and lead organizations, there's no right or wrong thing, right? So some people just behave a certain way and think a certain way. And that was really fascinating for me. So I did research and development for several years. Roche did market research, created new platforms as those research, and then moved on to the marketing commercial side and actually launched some of those products globally through Roche Diagnostics, which was brilliant. You don't get to do this very often, right? Do the market research and then develop a product and then move over and commercialize it. That was fascinating. So I did this for a couple of years. And then I moved into the overall program management, where we then ran programs all around the world, developing next generation diagnostic systems under the umbrella, of Roche Molecular. So that was brilliant. I did this totally close to 20 years with Roche. And again, I was living in the Bay Area, in Berkeley, outside of San Francisco. And I was very intrigued with startups, right? Because at Roche, we had lots of people, pitching next best technology and something else we should work with. And I was very often involved in due diligence of companies. So I was really intrigued. And then I came across a company that a colleague of mine recommended that did, sensitive immunoassays, a very small company, and I basically joined that company. That was a risk. So it was yet one of those, moving to the US was the first risk, but it worked out well. And then I felt like, should I try the small startup world, right? Can I do it, right? People were always worried about it. When you come from a big company, you have resources, and can he actually survive in a startup world? And I think it worked out very well. I took over all the operations there, really made, it was great. We really built the company from 20 people to about 300. Wow. And then in 2013, I took over as CEO of that company. So it was very unique. So the board trusted me. And then we had a management change, and I got to able to, start running the company, which is brilliant for me as a, first time CEO. I had some great coaches on the board who really helped me, guide me through the process. And as a result, then, we restructured the organization. We started selling pieces off. Exciting to see that technology is broadly used now in other areas of diagnostics. So that was my first foray into being a leader, building a culture, but then also divesting, right? So that was a fascinating part to have to go through that. Then I took a little break. I started building my consulting business. I felt like, let's do something different. And I started coaching startup CEOs and again, beginner management teams, which was brilliant for me. Did this for a while. And then I got a call from a Silicon Valley investor and said, Guido, what are you up to? I need some help. They started building a mega throughput COVID testing center. And they needed somebody who can cross the span, build systems. And so I said, well, let me look at it. I was excited. So it was the most stressful but most fascinating time of my life, because COVID was just ramping, not enough testing. And these guys had machines that were able to do hundreds of thousands of tests a day, right? So, and these are PCR tests. These are probably one of the world's fastest machines ever built for stuff like this. So we did it. We took off. And I always said we took off with the 747 without wheels on, because we were going so fast. People were sleeping in the lab, right? So just to make sure things get going. And it was fascinating. So I did that for close to a year. And it also ultimately wasn't what I wanted to do, but I wanted to get back to the community. Let's build this. Let's offer that solution. It was great. And then I came across Mainz Biomed, and that's really gets us then to where we are today. So I love to cure people. I love to help people extend their life, right? So as you go through my history, I've always been in that space. When I heard about Mainz Biomed, I was very intrigued because, first of all, they had it's a stool-based colorectal cancer test, and it's extremely easy to be collected at home. Many listeners, if they're a little bit older, probably some have done a colonoscopy. James, I know you have not. Lucky you. It's not a very pleasant procedure, right? And so, and in many cases, there is an alternative test that some people use in Europe, which is a FIT test. Basically, it measures whether you have blood in stool. It's an okay test, not great, not too good for early cancer detection, for example. So it's great for later stage. So it's better than nothing. But then what Mainz Biomed developed, they built on top of that FIT test. We added now an additional product that includes DNA markers, who then actually helps identify cancer at an earlier stage. And that's ultimately out of this philosophy, ColoAlert was created, which is a combination of the existing FIT test and these new DNA markers. I was very intrigued, first of all, because of COVID. It's like, okay, everything has to be done at home, right? You don't want to go to a physician's office. You don't want to go to draw centers to get blood, whatever, or, as long as you can do stuff at home, good, make the collection easy. So that was a check mark for me. I love that they already had a product in Europe, because many times technologies, it's the reality. Innovative diagnostics has barely come out of Europe. They mostly come out of the US, and they're in Europe. It's a different model in Europe. And so I love that they have a product in Europe. I love that they had initial customers and the feedback was good. So I knew there was work to be done because it was a small group, but there was a starting point. The clinical data they had created was good. I like that as well. And most importantly, James, was the business model that they started to entangle. So this is a really important part of mine. We'll probably go through it afterwards as well. But this is like a model that any laboratory and any physician you have can actually help you with. which is quite different than how, for example, one of the leading company in colorectal cancer screening is Exact Sciences, which is based in the US. So I like the completely differentiated model, because as we move forward, we're going to be very disruptive to the market by able to develop and deliver products. It's like a COVID test, right? So for the listeners, I think it's a good example. Like in the United States, if you want to have that advanced colorectal cancer test, you have one lab in all the United States performing that test, which means you have to ship everything centralized. It's like you have one COVID lab. Well, that would be a disaster, right? So what we have now, we build a system that you can sell to many labs around the world, right, who then actually offer these to your local solution. So it's a much quicker and less expensive process, allows you to go to areas that are not as populated. And that's an issue where we generally have, right, where the more urban you go, the more going to the countryside, the less medical support you have. And so being able to provide tools that are accessible to anybody really was the drive. So this is what I did. I joined Mainz. I was convinced, and the company again is based in Germany, in Mainz, which is 20 kilometers outside of Frankfurt. And we took the company public in November 21 on NASDAQ, and have ever since basically continued to build the company, worked on next generation products, started working on pancreatic cancer. And so that's kind of my long story. I hope it wasn't too long, but it's been really interesting how what I've learned, James, through, again, the different, there's always cool technologies out there, right? But you got to figure out a way, where is the true clinical value you can bring, right? So there's a lot of Me Too's out there, right? So, I mean, how many point of care COVID tests are still out there? Hundreds and hundreds. How do you differentiate yourself from somebody else, right? So especially as a startup, as you need to think about capital raise, etc. And so, but again, I think we're hitting a target that is very unique. That shortly in the future other companies will come in, but right now we're really the only one driving that forward. So that was the exciting part. That's why I am doing what I'm doing today.
I love that story, Guido, and you tell it very well. It's interesting to me just how COVID really, well, it changed people's expectations of what tests, I think, should and could be. The fact that the whole world saw what might have been previously a PCR test in a lab go all the way down to a point of care, bedside, at home, even lateral flow test. You can see the effect that has had on showing people the art of the possible, and people then thinking, well, what else could be done in this way that increases access, decreases how invasive it is, increases the ability for prevention and screening and all these things that we know will be incredibly useful. So it's interesting to me how that happened, and how you and what you have done has essentially leapt onto that and is championing that new way that we're going to be looking at point of care diagnostics. But before I go into that and what you're doing at Mainz, what I want to do is go back and talk to you about a couple of things that you said in your background, which really interested me. So you strike me as someone, you're a very good orator, and you speak very well, and clearly, you said you've been involved in coaching, and you seem to have a knack for being able to articulate things like leadership and culture, these things that you mentioned. One specific thing you said is that you learned from a mentor that you worked with, a almost like crazy scientist inventor with papers all over their desk. You learned that there's no right or wrong way to lead an organization. That's a really interesting phrase, because I think even on this podcast, I try and pull out elements of what good leadership is and what good leadership looks like. And of course, there will be broad truths within that. But can you just expand on that for me, that there is no right or wrong way when you lead organizations? And I guess maybe think about yourself as a leader, the leaders and mentors that you have had, and perhaps what you think good leadership looks like, even though there might not be a right or wrong.
So I think that's a good question, James. And I think maybe a good example is you have to adjust your leadership style based on the company somehow, right? So, when in my case now, I used to run small startups that grow fast in Silicon Valley, right? Where everything goes incredibly fast. And people don't mind spending the night there, sleeping over. It's a different world. So there you have different ideas, and as an entrepreneur and startup, again, another guy I really appreciate, a really successful investor, is like, when you run a company like this, you're like in a race car and you're racing down the road and you're going into a turn. You have to make sure you go as fast as you can, but you got to know when to stop to not go across the cliff, right? So it's this really kind of crazy out there push for timing and push for innovation, right? So that's how this is understood, right? So here, switch yourself to Germany, right? Quite a different culture. So how do you, when you come in, you have to adjust how you lead and coach and how you communicate with your team, because very structured, very organized. You have a different philosophy. The Americans, I mean, probably somewhere in between now. I always say, like, they live the work, right? Workaholics. People don't take vacations. Just different philosophy, right? You go to Europe, where I grew up with, it's just different, right? You kind of you live, but but you work that you can live, right? So it's a different approach, and so you have to, and it's not better or worse. And I think people with a little bit more structure and are not necessarily slower in delivering results, right? So it's this understanding of you're in a different environment, right? The regulatory environment and the reimbursement environment in Germany, for example, is also quite different than it is in the US. You need to understand that. So you have to adjust what you can accomplish, right? So that's important, because you got to be careful not to burn the team out, right? If you come in and think everything goes as fast and as in other places, that's just not the reality, right? So this was again for me an interesting learning lesson in the last 2 years, right? Just to tune down, adjust what you think you can accomplish, just be more pragmatic about it. And that's what I meant by, right? So really it is that's what I learned. It's you got to adjust your leadership style to the team that you're leading, because those are really good examples, because they're really different, right? I think everybody can understand how different the culture is. But that's also fascinating for me. That's why I always love to work with multinational companies, because we spend a lot of time working with the Japanese. It's yet another world, right? It's a complete different world. How you behave, how you talk, how they think, how the product needs to look, right? And then you go again into the Americas, and it's yet another. So I think that's what I love about it, with this multicultural approach, right? So that's what I'm saying. Not one way is right. It really is clearly, you coach individuals, you encourage them, you give them the tools to grow. That's certainly not different, right? But in many ways, just the overarching philosophy of how you can communicate and how you can, you just need to be more sensitized. That's what I'm saying, right? Don't expect, because people have rights, there are holidays on Thursdays, and it's what it is. And so you just got to adjust to this. So it's actually a stretch sometimes for me too, right? Because when you're too long in one area, it does stretch my leadership sometimes to chill out and realize that, but at the end of the day, the result is not any different, right? So that's the point. Sometimes a little bit slower gets you actually faster to the end than when you go too fast, because sometimes you go over the railing and you have to start again, right? It's quite interesting.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I guess the point that I hadn't really considered was that for someone like yourself that has worked with lots of different companies, actually there's a stage to leadership which comes before what I was really thinking about there, which is I was thinking, you've started a company, you've lived in one area your whole life perhaps, and you've not really experienced or had to lead in any different environments. And so you almost get to choose your style of leadership there. But I guess what you're saying is, for those people that move their career and move their leadership into different places, the first step there is adjustment, tuning, and understanding, all three of those words you used. And actually, I like what you said, that you also said that you talked about how you lead, coach, and communicate, and coaching and communication being such a big part of leadership. But again, you can only do that well after you've adjusted, after you've understood, after you know. You talked about culture, you talked about Japan, you talked about US, you talked about Europe. Actually, it's understanding culture initially, so you know the environment that you're in. Then it's understanding those people and understanding what they might want and need in order to get the most out of them. And it's that thing about high performance and how you get high performance. It's not the ceiling that you put on it. There is a ceiling. You need to find out what that ceiling is, how high that ceiling is, in order to know exactly how high you can drive these people. Because you might assume you can drive them into the earth, and you might end up accidentally doing that by not understanding culture, etc. And so, yeah, incredibly interesting what you just talked about. And this stuff absolutely fascinates me in terms of just achieving the highest possible performance with a given group of people and how you do that. So I think that definitely is fascinating to me. The other thing that I want to ask you about, though, is it sounds like at Roche, you saw a lot of you saw a lot of areas of the company, and you actually found yourself in roles. I say found yourself, you put yourself in the right place at the right time here, but you've given yourself such a view of that organization right from, well, the whole journey of the product, essentially, from the inception of it to the marketing, the communication of it, to the selling of it, to the design of it. You've kind of seen everything. Now, whether or not that was by luck or by design, I imagine it was elements of both. It always tends to be. But when you're looking to piece together a career that ends where, or at least it gets to the place where you are now as a leader of biotech organizations, it seems useful that you've seen that whole journey. It seems like that has given you the skills and the knowledge to be a very high quality CEO because you understand so many functions. Is that something that you would advise people to try and do? Or is it a case of just getting as close to leadership by whatever means necessary? Is it a case of learning, the classic, the hotelier that started in the kitchen and saw absolutely everything? What would you advise people that are looking to eventually get into biotech leadership?
So this is a really good question, and to me, as I started off talking about how broad my scope of work was when I first started at Roche, right, going across. So I'm a total believer in some type of generality, right? So the more you know about different places, the better you can connect the dots, and that's more important as a smaller startup CEO, right? As a company grows, you have very powerful people who will do stuff is established, right? But when you're a very small company, right? So there is somebody who has to be able to connect, right? And again, sometimes you have somebody within the organization that does that, and the CEO doesn't have to do it, right? Can focus on other stuff. In my case, because I've gone through all areas, I understand across what's necessary. It also helps me assess individuals. So in my case, in Mainz, I was really lucky to be able to select 2 or 3 individuals that are incredibly powerful. And some of them I knew partially from before, but I could figure out this is what we need at this stage. Right? We were able to bring, for example, a very incredible experienced head of development that has done it, for 20, 30 years as well. So that individual has seen a lot. And so I was able to quickly assess, okay, we have a young, dynamic team. It would be perfect if they have a little bit more a senior individual who gets it because they can coach them, right? So I think I'm a total believer, James, that the broader knowledge is, the more predictable, because you in your head you think about everything else differently, right? So at the end of the day, you talk to investors, you make commitments, and it helps me. But it's also maybe puts more stress on the individual, because if you know too much, it's hard. For example, being an engineer, I was data driven. It was not easy for me to start pitching a company that I knew not everything was completely understood yet, right? So it's so there's this trade-offs to when you know too much, because you do get into, sometimes some people just want to be more high level. Don't bother me with the details. Somebody else takes care of it. Some people are very successful in it, right? But that's just not who I am. I always are across. It also helps me understand the people right? If somebody, and I'm always very open, I really talk to at any level in the organization because they tell me things, right? So if you know more, you can understand what they're telling you, and you can impact their world as well by adjusting all the stuff, by connecting the dots. And that's very important from my point of view for a smaller organization. It's also, you can see somebody tells you something, you can say, well, are you really sure? Because you think it could be different, right? So it's much easier for you to kind of, sorry, my English, to see through the bullshit somebody may wants to tell you because you think it's just not right? So it just helps you manage better the broader knowledge. And I did this really on purpose. I did move around because I wanted to know different areas, and that was really a perfect, education for me at Roche that then really helped me in the startup world, right? Because I quickly was able to see, okay, this is an individual needs help in that area because that's what they really need to do. They're missing that element. So it gives you a much different perspective of individuals and the process you ultimately have to accomplish.
Yeah. And life is long and careers are long, and actually there can be this race to seniority.
Exactly. It's interesting, I mean, again, this is about technology, but I have 3 boys, and they're all one is study biology, and now he's studying veterinary medicine, right? And he's saying, well, why should I study so long? I love what I do. And then I said, Dominic, that's okay. You have life is long, do what you love to do when you're younger, go to school, and then you figure out your path afterwards, which is very not typical what you see here in Europe. Is more, Europe is, at least where I grew up in Switzerland, much more you study this and you do this for the rest of your life. I think that's my culture. It's probably why I left for the US. I need a broader view, and that's what I think is important, right? Think differently, think out of the box, start with something and do something else, because people between 20 and 30, everybody kind of figures out what they want to do. But most people don't know at 20 what they really want to do.
It's so true. But I do see and I feel this race to seniority amongst, as I say, even some of my friends. And actually, what you're saying, this ability to learn an organization or learn a sector through so many different vantage points, it doesn't matter necessarily how senior you're getting at that time. I think what you're doing is you're expanding your own ceiling. You're increasing the height to which you can go and the things that you can do. I love the framework actually that you just said, that making things more predictable. God, I feel that hits with me, that making things more predictable, because as I make my way through entrepreneurship and the things that we want to do and our ambitions and everything we're trying to do in the space with communications and media and everything that we're trying, the unpredictable element is what's catching me out. And actually I really feel that you even talked about making strategic hires to help make things more predictable, because ultimately we talk about the ups and downs of entrepreneurship all the time, the ups and downs of startups, the ups and downs of running organizations, and it being this huge up and down line all the time. And actually to optimize for predictability and to optimize your organization to make things predictable by hiring in experience if you don't have it, by hiring in expertise if you don't have it, to cope with those ups and downs. I think that's a really interesting framework that I'm going to take away, and I'm going to think deeply about that, about how can I make things more predictable. That's been incredibly useful for me. So thank you for that. I want to talk about Mainz Biotech now, and I want to talk about some of the things that you're doing and some of the things that you're moving into. So can you talk to me about the time that you moved into this? What was it that gripped you about this company to join? Why did you make that move?
The main reason was, this is a very innovative approach. First of all, there is, especially in colorectal cancer, there are ways of eliminating the cancer, right? So the prevalence has been going down, which is great, but still very deadly cancer. And so what's interesting with colorectal is on one hand, there's a gold standard, which is colonoscopy, which is, is a good gold standard, but it's not perfect. And and combine this with individual, right? The individual's possibilities to take charge of your life and of your health. I think COVID moved the community away from I have to ask my doctor all the time to I want to kind of figure it out myself too, right? So and so and here, I mean, just giving you an example of what happened at Mainz very recently, which reflects to that I want to be in charge of my health, was a mother was pregnant with her third child. So she had perfect pregnancies before, and the third one just was different. She didn't feel right. She felt like she wasn't gaining enough weight. She went to the physician. Physician said, "Don't worry about it. Her name is Lisa. Everything is fine. Not going to be a problem." Well, Lisa didn't take that as an answer. She said, I don't trust them. Something isn't right. She did research and she came across our ColoAlert test, which you can order online. She ordered the test. The test unfortunately came back positive, which means something wasn't seriously not right with her. So she went to her physician, and then they immediately ordered a colonoscopy, and unfortunately diagnosed her at a medium to late stage cancer, which is horrible, right? But thanks to us, she sent us a very lovely message, and we are still in touch with her. Not only did we actually, because we gave her a much higher chance of survival, because the earlier you detect colorectal cancer, the better is the survival rate. But furthermore, she could be the mother of her children, and so she recently gave birth to a beautiful child, beautiful girl. So this is a beautiful story. This is what excited me about this technology of Mainz Biomed. You are in charge of you are in control of your health, and there are tools out there more and more that you can educate yourself and and help yourself, like with the pancreas, as we spoken before. I just had also an event where I knew somebody very closely, unfortunately very late diagnosed. We need better tools for those cancers. That got me excited. I think that was really the hook for me to join Mainz and then continue, right? So as you then move on, it's perfect to detect cancer early, but there's now ways. So when you think about a colorectal cancer evolution, everything starts with a polyp in your colon. And so when you do a colonoscopy, you can actually identify which of those polyps are actually potentially, triggering cancer. So there's a very well understood description of if that polyp looks a certain way, you have an almost 10% chance of moving into colorectal cancer, and you eliminate that polyp during colonoscopy. And that's what we're doing as an organization. We have a current product in the market that can measure, the cancer stage. And now we're pushing forward with next generation tests that actually help identifying these precancerous polyps, which means you can go and get an easy screening done at home, and then you go to your physician if it's positive. And if it's truly that precancerous, you'll remove it, and you reduce your risk significantly to actually being even a cancer patient. I mean, that's the holy grail, right? So you can potentially eliminate colorectal cancer with those type of tests, and that's just priceless.
Forgive my ignorance here. I'm going to ask you some what might be quite stupid questions, but so you're detecting precancerous polyps with this minimally invasive or non-invasive even test. Can you walk me through what the test actually is? And can you speak at all to the sensitivity and specificity of this test versus a colonoscopy? And look, like a colonoscopy is incredibly invasive. And so, numbers like that have to be in consideration of the fact that, look, you're not sticking a camera in to have a look at things. This is something that is incredibly easy to do at scale. So by no means is it a direct comparison, but can you speak to that for me?
Sure. So I just want to clarify one thing, James, that, we're our first generation ColoAlert that we have in the market today. The study that was done didn't specifically highlight the sensitivity for these advanced adenomas, this precancerous lesions. So the data that we have with the current product, ColoAlert, has shown by the study by Professor Dollinger, has 85% sensitivity and 92% specificity for colorectal cancer. What that means is that, it's not 100%, right? And that's compared to colonoscopy. It's not 100%, but it's close. It's getting very close to equal.
Yeah.
And here also, I do want to be transparent about it, because we've had events where we had one patient that was really, really interesting. One of our actually clients who took from a laboratory took on our test. He's an accountant, and he's very timely and focused, and he did a colonoscopy a while ago and tested actually how long it took to take the colonoscopy. It was only 15 minutes. He then, as part of our process, do the ColoAlert test. The test came back positive, which surprised him. He went back in, did a colonoscopy, and then a colonoscopy took 30 minutes, and then it was positive. Okay, so so there's also a quality issue of the type of colonoscopy. It depends how good the patient actually follows the procedure to clean the colon, right, with all the medium you have to drink. So it's a gold standard, but it's it is as good as it is right now. But there are challenges with that as well. That's why we're happy with the performance we have for the current test. It's clearly advanced, better than when you just use the regular test, who just measures blood and stool. And so that's the way we look at it right now. For the next generation, again, we're working doing clinical studies right now to see how that next generation test then will actually improve not just the sensitivity and specificity for colorectal cancer, but also these precancerous polyps.
And it's a stool test, right?
That's correct.
And how does, again, it's a question that I mean, we talked about it very briefly before we started recording, but being a stool test versus being another test, obviously, it's better than a colonoscopy. Let's put it that way. It's a massive step in the right direction in terms of like let's call it the user experience of doing one versus the other. I don't know. Do you guys think about that as a barrier? Do you think about the fact that it's not, a saliva test or a cheek cell test, or, that there is still, I suppose, a stigma barrier, or even just like I don't know how you describe it, but like it's not as easy for people to come to terms with doing a stool sample versus something else. Is that something that you guys think about? Is that something that you see affects this in any way? I'm interested because you guys are obviously in it.
Yeah, we think about it all the time. And so clearly there is, it's not as easy as a cheek test, right? Clearly not. Or on a nasal swab or whatever we all used to do. But the reality is that, there are certain diseases that can just be better identified in stool. And what we're focusing on is the collection process, right? Make it as simple, as possible for the patient. And that, for example, right? So we spend a lot of time, endless nights thinking about how else we can do it. And so the way it's right done, it is already simple, but we want to make it even simpler by really just, being able to stick a little spoon into your stool and take out. I mean, as little as possible, as quick as possible, as simple. It's got to be very simple. And then also that you, for example, can just, which you can do in current product, you just collect it at home, put it back in our box, and then basically mail it with the regular mail. So that's important, right? So the convenience factor. We also have, elements that help you collect the stool. So there's all, again, it's not perfect, but we're working actively to just make it even a better experience, as good as you can make an experience. Because at the end of the day, if you think about the alternative, right? So if a test that you take every 2 or 3 years like this can prevent you from having cancer, I would do it every day.
100%. Totally agree. So you mentioned the business model and you mentioned the disruptive element of the business model. I'm interested to know how a test like this goes from MVP idea B2C, which obviously this can be purchased on through you guys right now for anybody. I'm interested to know how a test like this goes from that to then essentially having the health economic model completely approved that this is an excellent screening process that now countries must do at scale, which may or may not in some way be a goal of yours, I don't know. But how would a test like this go from being initial MVP B2C sale to incredibly popular mass market, even call it NICE approved, and this has to now be done through screening in the UK or indeed Europe or any other country. What's the path to that, and what is your business model to achieve that, or other methods of scale that you're looking at?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Again, it's a different and similar in every country, right? So in Germany, for example, we're started off, as you said, right? Basically, that test is already covered by private insurances. So that's, again, I'm just focusing on Germany as an example, right? We can talk in the UK as well. So private insurance, now we're starting to work through corporate health programs, right? So there's a lot of employees that are actually interested in offering a test like this. And many companies have actually healthcare programs in their benefits package, right? And so you want to get yourself into that benefits packages. Often, we talk about massive organizations like Siemens or Daimler or Volkswagen, right? I mean, as you name it, there's lots of companies that have it. So, but we're not at that stage yet. Some of those companies also have private company-based insurances. You go through those insurances, and ultimately you want to go to the public insurance, right? So that's the plan we're doing right now in Germany, and we're having discussions at all levels. So in the UK, clearly, we're just starting. We have one partnership with a lab in the UK that will go live in the coming weeks, and then basically we will also go through there again the private pay, assessing the private insurance. Certainly would have to work with NICE, and we had some initial discussions as well, and then do the appropriate studies to show that the health economic model actually, because we've shown a health economic model. The challenge we sometimes have is, there's a certain amount of colonoscopy centers available in countries, and what often happens is that it's the process is scanned in a way that those are not overflowing, right? So it's important that you have a test that is, everybody you bring in is certainly a very potential positive, right? So the specificity of your test is very important. So it's a trade-off that every country has to make. And as an example, I was attending the Digestive Disease Week 2 weeks ago in Chicago. So they have the World Endoscopy Congress there, and it was fascinating to see how this was a really global conference. So, and they were talking about how some of these colorectal cancer screening programs have been implemented. Again, many countries have national screening programs, where they basically today send people about 50 regular tests. A lot of people don't do the test, right? Because they don't really understand what it's for. So it has to do with education, but you have to really make this more impactful. You have to go into this, national screening programs, which we're starting to work towards as well. But that's just the process. In the US, it's different, right? In the US, you need to do a large clinical trials, get the FDA approval, and get also then the reimbursement approval, and then you can go into, the broader screening. The US doesn't have a national screening program, for example. It's just managed differently. Then you look at the Asian markets, yet again different. So, as you kind of talk different cultures, every is a little bit different how they're approaching, right? I talked to people in Argentina, and they had years ago a little bit of screening program, and it all fell apart because the government is all over the place and there's no money available, right? The Eastern Europe has no screening programs, okay? So I think, it's a stepwise approach, right? So where we are going, so we're very selective of where we're starting to enter the market with, understanding that every country is different. So that's really a process that takes time. Some countries takes 3 to 4 years before you get in, some longer, some shorter. So that's the approach, and the same approach we'll also take with you guys, right? As we move forward in our commercialization strategy.
Yeah, interesting. And actually, one thing that I'm increasingly thinking about and reflecting on at the minute is when it comes to prevention. I'm going to talk in the UK now, because I know half of our listeners are from the UK, the rest around the world, but in the UK, there's obviously an expectation of healthcare free at the point of service, right? Like, we have a national health service. That's what people expect. As technology expands and increases, and what we can do in health increases, and particularly prevention, it falls into this strange sort of zone, which is, do we expect the NHS to pay for it? And where there's a health economic model and plenty of evidence for, if we adopt this new screening process, it's guaranteed to actually save money, and it's horrible to talk about. It's really uncomfortable to talk about health outcomes in terms of money, but
sure.
Particularly if you're from the UK, it really is uncomfortable. But let's be clear: if it proves that, then clearly there's a big argument. Hey, the NHS can adopt this new screening process; it's guaranteed to save blah blah blah. In the lead up to that, there's an interesting question of who pays. There's people that will pay B2C. There's people that will pay B2B2C with insurance and private health insurance that they take out. But I think that there's this really big, important conversation to be had about employers. Because if you think about who benefits, of course the individual benefit, of course they will. But for those that can't afford, let's say, to take out private health insurance themselves, well, who's going to benefit massively from a person that would have ordinarily had to wait for a colonoscopy, not got it for a while, eventually got diagnosed, enters the NHS system at that point, then has a worse outcome, versus has a screening process, or has ColoAlert, a stool sample, it's done really early, blah blah. Like, of course the employer benefits here, of course they do. And actually, it seems like that. It seems like in the UK, I just think that for really big employers, and for arguably all employers, that this might be a really key buyer in modern health tech, because so much of modern health tech and biotech that affects patients is in prevention. And so many of the gains that we're looking to make, and particularly so many of the early stage innovations that I'm seeing at the moment, and where people's ideas are, particularly clinicians that are building companies or leaving to build companies, or patients themselves, it seems that so much of the kind of energy wants to go towards prevention, but with no clear payer. And in the run up to it having the evidence to be reimbursed anyway. So like, it feels to me like employers might be a big unlock here, and it feels like it's embryonic at the moment. And there are companies that certainly sell to employers at scale, and we've seen like the wellness stuff. Like, we've seen quite a lot of that, and there's a lot of platforms that are trying to do that kind of thing. But I just wonder, like, proving the case to employers is going to be a lot easier than proving the case to massive NHS screening processes more broadly. And I don't know, it feels to me like employers are a big unlock for health tech and biotech broadly, for this type of thing, for diagnostics and prevention. I don't know if you have any feelings or thoughts on that.
No, I agree with you. It is, again, I'm a believer in, screening early, right? So the preventative medicine is key, but nobody wants to pay for it. That's been, unfortunately, the case wherever you go, right? So because often, insurances, the issue is insurers don't want to pay for it because, they want to pay as little as they can today, right? So it's just that the long-term thinking is unfortunately not always in there, and that's often driven by how people are actually, rewarded. But nevertheless, that's the reality of life. But I think having, again, the stepwise approach, right, having to go through corporations because they understand, right? You can clearly show, first of all, they can show, and companies do want to attract their best talented people, and if a company can show they really care, right, which means they really spend money, on the health. There's a lot of mental health support people would need these days, but there's other health that we're providing. We want to make sure you're healthy, you're safe, we take care of you. Companies are actually, ranked on how well they're managing their people profiles. And so, if I look for a new job, I would certainly look for somebody that shows, it's not just about the profit, but it's also something that they take care of me. And if they have programs like this that ultimately help, right? It's certainly an mix between cost benefit for employees when the individual doesn't get sick or has to leave, but also that you have something else on your benefits program that you can really lure in potential better candidates.
Absolutely. I really think it's a big unlock in the space, but that's where education comes in as well, that actually by educating everybody that this test exists, you can create that bottom-up demand that people can actually then look for this type of thing. And people can then put pressure on their employer to say, well, what are you offering? Is it private health insurance? Is it screening processes for all of these different things? And I think, for those senior hires that for whom this becomes incredibly important, yeah, you're right. If people are measured on that and, it's a 50-50 between two places and, one's going to look after their colon health broadly with the education that is an incredibly important thing for a certain demographic, then that demographic might actually look for this stuff more deliberately. So I want to talk about the technology now itself and what you are looking to move into, because you mentioned pancreatic cancer, something that has affected my family. And so you're moving into research to identify, again, pancreatic cancer, right? And you've done some partnerships in this space. So, yeah, talk to me about the expansion of the technology into a different area, i.e., CA Panc, and how you're going about it, what you're learning, what you're doing.
As we spoke before, James, we're both connected with individuals who died of pancreatic cancer. So it's really, it's unfortunately and very, very deadly cancer. It's unfortunately diagnosed too late because there's just not a lot of symptoms, or not a lot of symptoms people look forward to, right? So, and so what we're moving towards is finding ways, as we do right now with the colorectal cancer. We identified specific biomarkers that you can identify in stool, who then basically predict, whether you have a high risk for colorectal cancer. We're taking a very similar approach. We're basically looking at different type of biomarkers now that we then verify, right? So we have pancreatic cancer patients, and we basically see whether we could have predicted those individuals with certain type of biomarkers we're exploring. So that program has been initiated a while ago, and very recently we are now also expanding into the microbiome. And as many of our listeners know, right, the microbiome is really the next frontier in medicine. Fascinating activities going on, new therapeutics being created. But in our case, we're looking for specific species in microbiome that could, if you have them or if you have a lack thereof, could clearly indicate that you are at risk of pancreatic cancer, colorectal cancer, or other GI cancer. There's lots of activities going on in microbiome, as our listeners know. We've seen data delaying, depending on how your microbiome looks, delaying autism and many other diseases. So I think the microbiome really is the holy grail. It's all what you put in there that really has an impact. And again, our research program with Microba, which is based in Australia, is the first step into exploring a little deeper what we can do. And as we learn from this research collaboration, we then incorporate those markers into additional studies to help. The way I would look at it, with pancreas, so the concept of testing for multiple cancer is important, right? So that there's certain tests out there that try to predict like 10, 15 different type of cancers at the same time. Our philosophy is different. We want to specifically look at fewer of those to be more specific, right? So clearly having a stool sample that is able to identify cancer, and then at the same time, you can run another PCR panel that then runs biomarkers for pancreas as well and potential other GI cancer. So you can really create a whole panel of potential applications that are very specific. That doesn't tell you that you have some type of cancer, but it tells you what type of cancer you actually have. And that's the specificity that's very important. So that's really something we're working on. Again, the sky is the limit here. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a tremendous amount of information that individuals can learn from their stool sample. And I know it's been very broadly used already in many, many areas today. Where nobody seems to care whether it's a stool sample. We get a lot of pushback sometimes, as we discussed before, but I think there's a broad community who really just wants to know what's going on with them. And if it requires a little stool sample, as long as it's easy, it takes 2 minutes of your life, could save your life. I think that's okay. At least that's the way I look at it. And so I think that's the way we're pushing it and educating individuals as well. So it's really a small process, but the value to an individual is priceless.
I think there's always going to be early adopters to this sort of thing. There's always going to be pioneers. There's always going to be people at the front of that frontier pushing it. And so for those people that hypothetically have had pancreatic cancer in their family and may or may not be a little bit concerned, would be more than willing to engage in a test every 6 months to see whether their stool is exhibiting any biomarkers for it. There are, of course, going to be those people. And I think, do you know what? I mean, more broadly, I almost wonder if, you know, I'm in the communications and marketing game myself. The campaigns here that actually destigmatize this in terms of collecting stool and measuring biomarkers. I think you only have to point to the effects downstream to see the value. And actually, we've destigmatized so much over time. In lots of different categories in health, and, you know, more broadly. So I think it's only a matter of time before this really has to take off, because I think the work that you're doing in colorectal cancer, in pancreatic cancer, it feels to me like it's almost too important. You talk about the microbiome being a frontier, right? Like, it is. We talked about before about, you know, delaying autism and fiber and short chain fatty acids and cognitive decline and the gut brain axis. And there's so much that we don't know about the microbiome that we are going to learn with things like sampling stool. Like, there's no two ways about it. Like, those two things are pretty well connected, the microbiome and the stool. So if we are going to learn this stuff at scale, of course there's going to be more stool sample collection. Of course there's going to be more research and evidence gained off the back of that stuff. And so we're going to have to destigmatize it. But it is exciting. I think in healthcare at the moment and in health tech at the moment, I think there have been a few things that have excited me. I think AI broadly has excited me for years. And even when AI went through a bit of a dip a year or two ago, after the sort of initial hype, I still said I was excited by AI because it was just maturing and it was actually starting to solve problems. And so AI has been incredibly exciting for me and remains to be. And it's had this now second, third, fourth wave, whatever number wave you want to call it, of large language models, etc., where the hype is back. But I'm less excited about the hypey stuff. I'm more excited about what that does for the maturation of the stuff that came behind it, came before it. But the microbiome is exciting to me. It really is, because of just how much we don't know. And that, for me, just provides this kind of, I don't know, it feels to me like within my lifetime, there are now going to be advancements and extra understanding and discoveries that we haven't had before. And I don't know, in health, I don't understand or know many of those things. And I guess in my life broadly, in technology and all the rest of it, there's space travel and there's like, I might see someone go to Mars, but where are the other frontiers of discovery? Like under the sea, maybe? I don't know. But like there's very few, but like in my world, the microbiome really is that. And, you know, we've spoken to Thomas on here, the founder of Biotech, and there's definitely more founders that I want to speak to in the microbiome because of how much we can learn. But I think for me, to link all this back to what you're doing, I think the microbiome and how that pertains to pancreatic cancer, if that is something that's currently undiscovered, well, let's discover it. Because, my goodness, anything that can help prevent pancreatic cancer, which is an incredibly fast-moving, incredibly destructive cancer. I mean, there's small mercies in just how quickly it takes people, I guess, but that really is a small mercy for the fact it does take people so quickly. And you know, the experience of my family of this, I just think that the research going into this is incredibly important. And I mean, I'm interested for you guys, like, what is the goal here with this? Is it to achieve screening for everybody every 6 months on colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer? Are you guys looking to develop tests more broadly and look for other conditions too? I know you mentioned that you're not looking to spread your bets too far. You're more interested in the specificity, but do you have your eye on any others? I don't know. How does Mainz Biotech see the future, and what part do you guys want to play in it?
Yes. So the concept of our approach is to do the test not every 6 months, but it's specifically for because colorectal cancer, for example, doesn't grow that fast. So if you do every 2 to 3 years, that's the way we're looking at it. And combined is then with pancreas as well, right? So it's because just doing pancreas alone is going to be very difficult from a cost benefit point of view.
Sure.
Because of the prevalence being so low. So that's one area. But then the other area with other GI cancers, we are just exploring. Again, part of the microbiome program is that to figure out what other GI cancer can you actually identify in stool. But there is other, like the Crohn's disease, for example, where, this is really horrible. A good friend of mine's son is 19, just diagnosed with Crohn's disease. The poor kid has to do colonoscopies almost every year, because there's such, or Lynch syndromes, there's such a high risk of developing colorectal cancer. It's got to be something else out there, right? So, and we also want to explore helping. These are not screened; these are truly diagnostic markers, right? So basically, if somebody has been diagnosed with Crohn's, do that test maybe every year, right? So, and if the test is positive, then go in and do a colonoscopy because you have something going on. That's the approach, right, James? But we're not there yet. One thing I learned as well in my life is as a smaller organization, you got to do a few things and got to do them right. You can quickly spread your wings too wide, and that's not that's not what I think ultimate success is guaranteed. So from that point of view, but that's the approach that we're taking, right? So really expanding, doing the core research, especially in the microbiome. There's more clinical research needed, and that's what we're going to do.
Guido, I love it, and thanks so much for coming on. I think your approach is wonderful. I think that what you're part of is the future. The overwhelming need for less invasive tests, or indeed non-invasive tests in this example, to reach not only the bedside but actually people's homes is incredible. We've seen through COVID the art of the possible. I think the demand is definitely there bottom up. Forgive the pun, but yes, it's incredibly important. And yeah, it's just lovely to see that you guys are part of this, and someone with your background, your experience, your ability and understanding across AI from the mid-90s all the way up to, engineering even before that, and all the way up to pharma and biotech and what you're doing now. It's incredibly cool. For those people listening that want to potentially get a test or have a look at this more, or indeed get in touch with you to learn a bit more, what's the best way for them to find you?
So we can certainly go through our website, the Mainz Biomed website. You can find the information there.
Guido, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.